Most people spend their entire lives trying to reach level 7 without ever building level 1. They read books about wealth. They follow financial influencers. They study investment strategies and real estate tactics. And yet, they remain financially fragile, one crisis away from losing everything they built. The strange part is this: the path they're missing wasn't discovered recently. It wasn't developed by a modern economist or a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. It was documented nearly 3,000 years ago by a man who, according to the historical record, accumulated more wealth than any ruler of his era. A man who understood that financial wisdom is not a single decision, but a progressive discipline built in layers. His name was Solomon, and what he identified wasn't a shortcut, it was a sequence. Between now and the end of this video, we are going to walk through each of the 7 levels he described, what they mean, how they were lived out in the ancient world, and why most people today are unknowingly skipping the ones that matter most. Before we continue, if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, take a moment to do that now, and write in the comments where you're watching from. I want to see how far this message is reaching. Here is the question that most financial conversations never ask. Why do some people, given the exact same income, the same opportunities, and the same access to information, consistently build something lasting, while others consistently do not? It isn't intelligence. History has no shortage of brilliant people who died in poverty. It isn't luck, because the patterns are too consistent across too many different cultures and centuries. And it isn't simply hard work, because the world is full of people who work exhausting hours and still have nothing to show for it 30 years later. What separates these two groups runs deeper than any strategy or tactic. Solomon, in the Book of Proverbs, does not begin his financial instruction with advice about what to do with money. He begins with the internal conditions that make a person capable of handling money at all. This is the part that almost no one pays attention to, and it explains why most financial advice, however technically correct, simply doesn't work for most people who receive it. The wisdom he recorded operates in levels. Each level builds on the one before it. And if any level is missing, the levels above it are structurally unsound, regardless of how impressive they look from the outside. To understand what Solomon was describing, it helps to understand who he was, not as a religious figure, but as a historical administrator of extraordinary resources. Solomon ruled Israel during what historians refer to as its period of greatest economic expansion. Under his reign, Jerusalem became a center of international trade. The historical record in the Book of Kings describes a yearly income of 666 talents of gold, an amount that, by some estimates, would represent billions of dollars in modern terms. He oversaw construction projects that required coordinated labor across thousands of workers, managed diplomatic relationships with trading partners from Egypt to Arabia, and organized a supply chain that kept an entire kingdom functioning. He didn't inherit a simple treasury. He inherited a complex organization, and he built it further. What's significant is that in the middle of all this administration, Solomon sat down and wrote. The Book of Proverbs contains his observations on why some people accumulate and others do not. These were not abstract philosophies. They came from a man who watched at close range how people managed and mismanaged the resources he placed in their hands. And what he observed is strikingly consistent with what behavioral economists centuries later would eventually confirm. The 7 principles we're going to examine today are drawn from that body of writing. They form a progression, a ladder, and understanding where you currently stand on that ladder is more valuable than almost any specific financial advice you could receive. The first level seems almost too simple to be important. That's exactly why most people skip it entirely. Solomon writes in Proverbs 19:20, "Listen to counsel and accept discipline, that you may be wise in the end." The capacity to genuinely receive instruction, not to hear it and immediately filter it through the lens of what you already believe, but to actually allow it to change your thinking, is the foundation of everything that follows. Solomon calls this the beginning of wisdom, not a preliminary step before wisdom begins. The listening itself is wisdom. This creates an immediate problem for the modern world, because we live in an era of unprecedented access to information and an unprecedented resistance to genuine instruction. People consume financial content constantly: podcasts, articles, videos, books. But consumption is not the same as learning, and learning is not the same as listening. In Solomon's observation, the person who cannot truly listen tends to repeat the same financial mistakes with increasing amounts of money. They will hear advice, apply a surface-level version of it, see it fail, and conclude that the advice was wrong. They never consider that the problem might be in how they listened. The practical application is uncomfortable. Before you spend another hour consuming financial content, ask yourself honestly whether you have ever genuinely changed a financial behavior because of something you heard, not modified it slightly, changed it. If the answer is difficult to find, you are still building level 1. And here is the deeper problem that level 1 reveals, because once you can truly listen, a new challenge emerges. The second level is where most people encounter their most persistent obstacle, not because they don't understand it, but because they underestimate how deeply it runs. Proverbs 25:28 uses an image that would have been immediately understood by anyone living in the ancient Near East. Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. In the ancient world, a city without walls was not simply vulnerable, it was indefensible. It didn't matter how much gold was stored inside, how skilled the soldiers were, or how wise the king happened to be. Without walls, everything inside was exposed. Everything built could be undone in a single night. Solomon is saying that financial discipline functions as infrastructure, not as a virtue in the abstract sense, but as literal protective structure. Without it, every gain is temporary, every accumulation is exposed. This is why two people can receive identical windfalls, an inheritance, a bonus, a business opportunity, and produce completely different outcomes within 5 years. One has walls, the other does not. And the one without walls doesn't lose their money because they made bad investments. They lose it because every opening in their financial life eventually allows something to drain out. The Talmudic tradition takes this further, describing financial discipline not merely as the ability to spend less, but as the ability to delay the conversion of resources into consumption. The capacity to hold, to resist the pressure to immediately liquidate what you've accumulated, is treated as a distinct skill that must be developed deliberately. The modern application is this: before you build a budget, track your expenses, or open an investment account, examine your walls. Where are the gaps? Where does money consistently exit without conscious decision? That audit is level 2 work. But discipline alone still isn't enough. Because a disciplined person who does mediocre work is simply disciplined at maintaining mediocrity. The third level introduces a principle that the ancient world understood in a way that the modern world has partly lost: the relationship between the quality of your work and the level of people you have access to. Proverbs 22:29 states, "Do you see someone skilled in their work? They will serve before kings. They will not serve before officials of low rank." This is not a motivational statement. It is a description of how economic networks actually function. In Solomon's world, and in virtually every economic system since, resources do not flow randomly. They flow through relationships. And relationships are not randomly distributed either. They cluster around trust, and trust is built primarily through demonstrated competence. The person who does their work excellently gains access to networks that the merely adequate person never enters. Here is the historical detail that most people miss about this principle. The professional class in ancient Israel that most consistently applied this teaching was not the merchant class. It was the scribes. Scribes who could read, write, calculate, and communicate precisely became indispensable to kings, governors, and wealthy traders. Their excellence was not about passion or calling, it was about making themselves genuinely difficult to replace. And that irreplaceability translated directly into economic access. The modern implication is this: excellence is not about working harder at everything. It is about working at a level of quality in a specific area that creates genuine scarcity around your skills. Most people who struggle financially are not unintelligent or lazy. They have simply never pushed any single capability far enough past the threshold of adequate to make themselves valuable to the right rooms. Level 3 is about reaching that threshold in something. One thing is enough, but it has to be real. And once you're in those rooms, the question becomes what you do when you're there. The fourth level is where financial wisdom becomes visible in its most practical form, and where a historical discovery completely reframes how this principle should be understood. Proverbs 27:23-24 reads, "Be sure you know the condition of your flocks, give careful attention to your herds, for riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generations." Most readings of this passage interpret it as advice to pay attention to your assets. But that reading misses the structural point Solomon is making. He is not simply saying, "Watch your money." He is saying that accurate knowledge of your current reality is the prerequisite for every decision that follows. The farmer who doesn't know the actual condition of his flock cannot make correct decisions about grazing, breeding, selling, or expanding. He is navigating by assumption. And in economics, assumptions that aren't corrected by accurate information compound into disasters. Here is the discovery that changes everything about this level. Archaeological records from ancient Mesopotamia and Israel show that the households that maintained the most consistent multi-generational wealth were not necessarily those that made the best investments. They were those that maintained the most meticulous written records, debt tablets, inventory records, land registries. The discipline of knowing precisely what you own, what you owe, what you earn, and what you spend was not optional among those who built lasting wealth in the ancient world. It was foundational. This is why the modern equivalent, people who have a vague awareness of their finances but have never sat down to produce an accurate accounting of their actual net worth, are not simply being careless. They are operating without the information required to make level 4 decisions. Administration is not a personality type. It is a practice, and this practice creates the conditions for something far more significant. Level 5 is where the sequence becomes difficult, not because the principle is complex, but because it requires confronting the mistake that stops the majority of people from ever reaching it. Ecclesiastes 11:2, written by Solomon, says, "Invest in 7 ventures, yes, in 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land." This is one of the earliest recorded descriptions of diversification in the historical literature, and it contains a philosophical position that most people intellectually agree with but emotionally resist. The future is uncertain, and your strategy must account for that uncertainty rather than pretend it doesn't exist. The mistake that prevents people from reaching level 5 is not a lack of knowledge about how to invest. It is the belief, rarely stated explicitly but clearly visible in behavior, that they should wait until they are ready, until they have more information, until conditions are more favorable, until they feel confident. Solomon's instruction contains no such condition. The reason he says invest in 7 ventures, or 8, is precisely because no one knows which one will succeed. The strategy is not built on prediction. It is built on the acknowledgement that prediction is limited. What stops most people at this level is the emotional cost of accepting that acknowledgement. To invest is to commit resources to an uncertain outcome. And people who have not fully developed the earlier levels, who have not built discipline, who have not administered their current resources accurately, find that the emotional risk of uncertainty at this stage is simply too high. They wait. And waiting, when compounded over years, becomes the single most expensive financial decision most people ever make. But multiplying resources is still not the highest level, because multiplying resources without wisdom about people eventually creates a different kind of crisis. Very few people reach level 6, not because it requires rare talent, but because it requires a specific kind of self-awareness that the earlier levels, if properly developed, should have produced, and most people have not developed it. Proverbs 11:14 states, "Where there is no guidance, a nation falls, but in an abundance of counselors there is safety." Level 6 is the transition from managing your own resources to coordinating the efforts of others. And this transition is where the majority of people who have accumulated something significant eventually make their most damaging mistakes. The pattern is consistent across centuries and cultures. The person who built something through individual discipline and excellence frequently cannot release control sufficiently to allow the system to grow beyond their direct involvement. They know how to work. They do not yet know how to lead. And the difference between those two things is more consequential than almost anything else in the economic history of wealth creation. Solomon's observation is surgical. The leader who surrounds themselves with genuine counsel, not with people who agree, not with flattering advisors, but with people who will tell them what they actually need to hear, builds systems that can survive the leader's own blind spots. This is why the tradition of peer counsel was so embedded in the culture of ancient Israelite commerce. Decisions of consequence were rarely made in isolation. The merchant who sought out the judgment of people wiser than himself in specific domains was not demonstrating weakness. He was demonstrating level 6 competence. In modern terms, if every significant financial decision you make is made alone, you have not yet reached level 6. Not because your individual judgment is necessarily poor, but because no individual judgment, however refined, can see what a well-structured counsel can see. And here, at the threshold of level 6, something becomes possible that was not possible before. The 7th level is the synthesis of every level before it. It is not a new skill. It is the full expression of what the first 6 levels, properly developed, were always pointing toward. Proverbs 13:22 states, "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children." The surface reading of this is about money. The deeper reading is about time horizon. Solomon is describing a particular kind of person, not simply someone who has accumulated wealth, but someone who thinks in generations. Someone whose financial decisions are made not primarily in reference to their own lifetime, but in reference to a timeline that extends beyond them. This shift in time horizon changes every decision that precedes it. The person building a legacy does not spend resources the same way. They do not take risks the same way. They do not evaluate success the same way. They are playing a fundamentally different game, not because they are more virtuous, but because they are thinking further forward. And this is why level 7 is not achievable by simply willing yourself to think about your grandchildren. It is the natural destination of a person who has genuinely done the work of the previous 6 levels, the listening that makes you teachable, the discipline that builds your walls, the excellence that opens the right rooms, the administration that gives you accurate knowledge, the multiplication that grows what you know, the leadership that builds systems beyond yourself. Each of those levels, properly developed, expands the time horizon of your thinking. Level 7 is not added on top. It emerges from the others. History provides a vivid and specific example of this entire sequence working in practice, one that most people are familiar with in broad outline, but rarely examine closely. Joseph in Egypt. Joseph begins his economic career not as a free agent, but as a slave. He has no capital, no network, no credentials. What he has, and what he consistently demonstrates across the early chapters of Genesis, is the capacity to listen, to work with exceptional quality, and to administer whatever environment he is placed in with such accuracy and discipline that he is always eventually trusted with more. When Potiphar, the Egyptian official, places Joseph in charge of his household, the text records that he stopped paying attention to anything under his care because Joseph handled it so completely. That is a description of level 3 excellence producing level 6 trust. When Joseph eventually reaches Pharaoh and is asked to address Egypt's coming economic crisis, his response is a precise exhibition of level 4 and level 5 thinking. He doesn't simply predict the problem. He designs a specific administrative structure, collect 1/5 of the harvest during the years of abundance, store it in controlled quantities, release it in calculated measure during the years of scarcity. This is not improvised wisdom. It is the full expression of a person who has developed each level of the sequence. And the result is that Egypt not only survives the famine, it becomes the economic center of the ancient Near East during the crisis, with surrounding nations coming to purchase what Joseph's administration had stored. The legacy was not just personal, it was national, and it began with a young man learning to listen. The question this raises is practical. Where are you in this sequence? Not where you think you are, not where you hope you are, where you actually are, based on honest examination. If you have never genuinely changed a financial behavior as a result of instruction, not information, but actual instruction received with openness, level 1 still requires your attention. If money consistently exits your life through gaps you haven't identified, through recurring expenses you're only vaguely aware of, through purchases made under emotional pressure, through financial boundaries that you set and then abandon. Your walls need work before anything else. If you have not pushed any specific capability past the threshold of adequate into genuine excellence, the rooms that make level 5 possible will remain closed. If you cannot produce an accurate written account of your current financial condition, total assets, total liabilities, monthly cash flow, in less than an hour, you are administering by assumption. If you have been waiting for a better moment to begin investing, more knowledge, more confidence, more certainty, you are experiencing the hesitation that Solomon's level 5 instruction was specifically designed to address. If every significant financial decision you make is made alone, level 6 is the next conversation to begin having. And if your financial decisions are made primarily in reference to your own lifetime, your own retirement, your own comfort, your own generation, the question of what you are building toward remains unanswered. The work of identifying your actual level is not discouraging. It is clarifying. It tells you exactly where to direct your energy. And energy directed to the right level at the right time is far more powerful than energy scattered across all 7 at once. If this message resonated with you, share this video with someone in your circle, especially on Facebook. There's a chance this is exactly what someone in your network needs to hear right now. At the beginning of this video, I said that most people spend their entire lives trying to reach level 7 without ever building level 1. Now you can see exactly why that's true, and exactly what it costs. The 7 levels are not a list of achievements to check off. They are a sequence of internal and practical developments, each one preparing the conditions for the next. Listening creates the capacity for discipline. Discipline makes excellence possible. Excellence opens the rooms where administration matters. Sound administration makes multiplication responsible. Multiplication creates the platform for leadership. And leadership extended across time becomes legacy. Remove any one of these levels, and the structure above it loses its foundation. That is not a metaphor. It is precisely what Solomon observed, what the historical record confirms, and what 3,000 years of financial patterns consistently demonstrate. The question has never been how much wealth you can accumulate. The question has always been which level you're actually building and whether the foundation beneath it is real. Solomon already identified the answer. The only remaining question is what you choose to do with it.